Better buckle up those seatbelts, because you're about to meet the amazing girls of Daraja Academy, a free boarding school for Kenyan girls who couldn't afford to go to high school, but are now changing the world, and the talented people that believe in their dreams. My name is Jason Doherty, and this is Daraja Means Bridge, the podcast. So, in front of one of those United Nations tents, they set up an old desk, and the four of us sat down with Jemima. Now, Jemima was a small girl, maybe 5 feet tall. She had a round face and a shaved head and a really big smile. But her eyes were sad. You could see that they were eyes that had seen horrible things, that had felt fear. That poor girl had lost her home. It had been taken from her. It had been burned down. Who knows what she saw when neighbor turned on neighbor. And she was carrying that with her. And I root for the underdog, so part of me was pulling for her, even though you're not really supposed to do that. So we did our introductions, and she shook our hands. And before we started, she said, "You know, I just would like to say that even if I don't get into your school, I want to thank you because I've never talked to a European before." And we thought, wow, it was so sweet and so sincere. And it reminded us that this is a child. This is a child. She's been through a lot, but she's still a kid. So we always start out our student interviews with the same question. And that question is, why is education important to a Kenyan girl? Now, even though we were outside, there weren't a lot of people around. I think there was a man about 50 yards away who was herding some sheep on the green grass. And up on the hill, there's a mountain range that started about a quarter of a mile from where this settlement was. You could hear a man chopping wood. But after Jemima was asked that question, she looked down at her hands and waited. And we sat there. And my inner voice starts saying, "Come on, kid, you can do this. You need this opportunity. You can do this." And she's twiddling her thumbs. And you can hear the man chopping wood. And then she takes a deep breath. And she looks directly at me. And she says, "You know, when we could hear the screaming start that night, and the men were coming with their torches and their machetes, the people that hadn't gone to school, they were gathering everything that they owned. There was a man who was trying to pack his bed up so he could drag it out because it had taken him a year to purchase it. Some of them got caught, but the people who went to school, they just gathered their children and their wives and their families, and they ran. They carried their education with them." And that hit me right in my soul. For that girl, education wasn't about math and science. Education was about independence. It was about safety, security, about freedom. You could never take away a person's education once it had been earned. Education was everything, and I knew at that moment that this was the most important thing I would ever do in my life. Daraja Academy had to be more than a school. Daraja Academy was a launching point for incredible women if we could just get it right. So obviously Jemima got into our school and she had a great 4 years with us. And in the last 12 years, we've had over 350 girls come through our gate. And each one of them had a story. And each one of them has a future because they've been educated. Whenever people ask my wife and I, "How the heck did you end up running a school in the African bush?" she generally laughs and says, "It's his fault." And she's kind of right. I'm the fifth of 5 kids, but my next brother is 15 years after me. So my parents wanted to travel as I was growing up. So every summer we got to go to different places, and I really think that travel is the best educator there is for a kid in the world. But when I was 12 years old, we took a trip to Kenya, and I was excited, right? I'm a young guy who grew up loving animals. Marlon Perkins' Wild Kingdom, watched it every Sunday night religiously. And so I was just excited to see the animals. But as our plane touched down in Nairobi and we got off, there was a tangible feeling that was going through my body. It didn't make sense. I loved it, and I was in an airport that had been built in the 1960s. And we piled into a van on our way to the hotel, and it was like I was at Disneyland the first time as a little kid. And we were driving through downtown Nairobi traffic, stuck. There was a bus that was belching black smoke in our face. People walking home from work on the side of the road. And I knew that I was home. I felt it in my bones. I didn't visit Kenya. Kenya happened to me. And that feeling of being in Disneyland didn't go away. The next morning I woke up and it was there. The next morning as we traveled to beautiful parts of the country and we met different people from different cultures, it just got more exciting. I felt like I was in the place where I belonged. And when I got home, that never went away. My life was going to go back to Africa because we did end up traveling to different countries, to Botswana and Zimbabwe and Tanzania. There's so many places on that continent that are magical. But my heart really resides in Kenya. So up next to my Joe Montana posters and Ronnie Lott posters went maps of Kenya and maps of Africa and old pictures, and it just became a shrine. And so as I was going along through high school, I thought, okay, I'm going to go to college, and then I'm going to join the Peace Corps, and I'm going to do 2 years somewhere on the African continent. But when I was 19, I got into a very bad car accident. Like, so bad, the kind of bad where a kid that was driving too fast and hit an oak tree looks down and the engine block is in his lap. Literally saw my femur sticking out of my jeans. So after 6 months in the hospital and 2 years of recuperating, Peace Corps was totally off the table. But Africa never left my heart. In fact, as I did my physical therapy, that was kind of the goal. That was what I was working towards. That's what I had my eyes on. So I'd saved up enough money after I graduated that I got on the internet, and this is back in 1999. The internet was new, and I learned about a guy who had left the Peace Corps, and he was trying to start a computer school in Makambako, Tanzania. Now, Makambako, Tanzania is a tiny town in southern Tanzania. It's really a kind of a overgrown bus stop. Peace Corps people call it Dead Dog Town, but it sounded awesome to me. So I bought a ticket to Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, and I went. And I didn't know anybody, but I wanted to adventure around. Now, I'll be honest with you, I was scared when I got there. I got homesick and missed it, but I was excited too. And it was when I was at Makambako, living at a secondary school, that I fell in love with education. I'd always loved history, but I didn't know that I wanted to be a teacher. So one night as I was tutoring students, I was sitting there with this guy who was in his 20s, and he'd gone to that school. He wanted to be a teacher, but he didn't have money to go on to university. So he was also helping tutor. And he said to me, Jason, is it true that in the U.S., if you get caught out of school, that the police can pick you up and bring you back to school? I said, yeah, it's called truancy. And he kind of got thoughtful for a minute, and he said, do you know, my parents sold our only cow so that I could go to high school, and they didn't have money for my little brother to come to Makambako Secondary. But he wanted to go so bad that he just kept showing up and showing up and showing up. And finally, one of those days, the security guard told them, I'm going to call the police, and you cannot come back here anymore, or you will be arrested. And I thought, dang, man, the difference between the mindset of a teenager in the U.S. and a teenager in Tanzania or any developing world country where education is not given out freely to everybody. The mindset is just so different. The value, the knowledge that education is the ladder that's going to help you climb out of the life that you feel trapped in. And at that point, I thought, okay, I want to be a teacher and I want to come back here. So after living there about 6 months, I did come back to the U.S. and I entered into a teaching credentialing program. And right near the beginning of that, I met an incredible woman named Jenni Hardy and fell in love. And that woman became my wife, Jenni Doherty. And she is instrumental in this story. So she was finishing college, and I was a new teacher, and I was coaching football. I love football, and I love coaching, and I love teenagers. So we were living a really happy life. But you know what? The call of Africa never left. It just kind of stayed. And so after about, I guess, 5 years of doing that, I finally said to her, Jenny, I really want to try this. I would really like to try and start a school over in Africa. We didn't know it was going to be Kenya. I had just lived in Tanzania. And there was something about the way I told her. She's going to be on a later podcast, and I'll let her tell the story. But she took me seriously, and we started telling people. We're going to try to do this. Will you help us? And originally, those people that got behind what would be Daraja Academy, they weren't that invested in girls' education. They just believed in Jenny and I, and they could tell we were passionate. So that next summer, we decided, let's see if Jenny can live on the other side of the world. You know, she'd grown up in Idaho and Arizona, and she'd never left the continental United States. So we got on a plane and we went to Kenya, and she caught the bug just like I did. We went from Kenya to Tanzania, spent a lot of time in Tanzania. But for some reason on that trip, all the arrows were pointing at Kenya. It was going to be the place that we were going to do this school. And so the next year we came back and we started looking for land where we could build the school of our dreams. It was going to be small, but it was going to be special. But we wanted to do one thing correctly, because I was an international relations major, and there is a lot of mistakes that are made when countries like the US or the UK try to run programs in a place like Kenya. Often they don't ask Kenya what it wants. They just have a solution and they try to shove it down Kenya's throat. And we didn't want to do that. So we asked as many Kenyans as we could, what kind of school should this be? And what we were told was, you need a girls-free high school. Because if a family can send one of their kids to school, it's almost always going to be the boy. So basically that didn't seem fair to us. And at that time, only 50% of the girls were going from 8th grade to 9th grade. And so we decided, all right, this is what we were going to do. But we wanted to talk to a lot of people, talk to people that knew what it was like to run a school. So we met up with a man that was running a school in one of Nairobi's slums called Korogacho. Now, Korogacho is built on the Nairobi dumps, and it's an amazing thing to see. There's tens of thousands of people that live very closely, and many of them, the village or the slum has a kind of an economy that's based off of the dump. So it's this huge crater in the ground, I would say almost a quarter of a mile across, that is just full of Nairobi's trash. And far down there, you can see people picking through it and finding things that they can repurpose and they can sell. And there's a real industry, and it's actually really inspiring. But this man was a pastor, and he was running a school for kids and charging very little money to do it. But his fundraising was limited. So he wanted to show us his students. They were taking an exam. It was the wrap-up of an entire term, like a 3-month period. So we walked down into the school, and it was a very simple school, but you could tell there was love put into it. There was little murals painted on the walls. But as we were walking through the gate, the pastor was so excited, and he was talking to Jenny and I. We walked past this little girl who barely came up to my thigh, and she had this tiny stub of a pencil in her hand, and she was playing with it. It maybe was an inch long. You could see that she had used it and had economized every stroke of that pencil. She was holding it nervously, and she was trying to catch the pastor's eye. But he was so excited to be with us that we walked right past her. We went into the classroom, he showed us, he introduced us to the students, and we talked to them. And we actually learned a lot of stuff. And then after about 45 minutes, we turned to leave. And as we were walking out, that little girl was still standing at the gate. And he saw her this time, and he said, "Hey, Agnes, why aren't you in there taking your test?" And she took him off to the side, and they whispered, and it looked like she was going to cry. And then he patted her on the head and waved her into the classroom. And as we were walking up, he said, because We try to pick everything up free for these kids. We do ask the parents to pay for our supplies. So we ask for them to pay for the papers that are printed, the tests are printed on. And her dad had drank up the money that they were going to use on the tests. And I asked him, how much was it? And it was 30 shillings, the equivalent to about 30 cents in the US. This little girl was not going to take the test that was going to make 3 months of studying relevant because she didn't have 30 cents. And it just made everything very real for us. So when Jenni and I when Jenni and I went back to where we were staying, we talked about it quite a bit. It really, really affected us. But we didn't know where we were going to build this school. So we toured around the country and we looked at some places where there was a lot of agriculture. We looked at places close to the city. We were just going to have to buy a lot because we weren't going to buy a school and kick kids out. And then finally, on about the third to last day, we had gone out to dinner with the family that was hosting us, this incredible family that I'll also talk about in the future. They're from the UK and they run essentially a school and a microfinance organization called Turning Point Trust. It's in Kibera, which is a different slum in Nairobi. And so we went out to dinner and we were thanking them for letting us stay at their place. And as we were walking in, there was this store that kind of caught my attention, and we sat down and we were ordering and we were given the menus. And this store, it was like there was a tractor beam pulling me in. And what's really weird about that is it was called the Red Gecko, and it was a woman's boutique. There was no reason to go into this store, but I kind of looked at the menu and then I said, I'll be right back. I'm going to go in there. And Jenni got frustrated because I kind of do that quite often. And she said, sit down and order something. So I said, I'll have a cheeseburger. And I got up and I went in the store and I'm walking around. I'm looking at scarves and like dresses and stuff like that. And this young Kenyan woman behind the desk says, can I help you? Are you on safari? And I said, no, actually, my wife and I are going to be starting a school. We're thinking about starting a school. She goes, oh, that's incredible. One of my friends, her grandfather started a school in Kenya back in the 70s. She goes, where are you looking to do it? And we had looked at a place called Kinangop. It was very green. It was on the edge of the Rift Valley. And I told her, probably Kinangop. And she goes, wow, that's incredible. He knows Kinangop too. You should call him. And she scribbles down his phone number on a piece of paper. And I was fired up, and I went outside, and we had dinner. And I called him. I was a little bit nervous, but I was excited. He's an educator, and this voice picks up the phone. Hello? And I said, oh, hello, sir. My name's Jason Doherty, and my wife and I are going to be starting a school, and we're thinking about Kinangop, and I hate Kinangop. He was this cranky old British guy. I hate Kinangop. It's too bloody cold. I said, oh, okay. And he said, but I'll talk to you about school if you come to my office tomorrow. So we found out where his office was, and we ended up going there the next morning. And it was a unique experience. My wife and I walked in. His secretary showed us into his office. We sat there for about 10 minutes. And then he came in, he sat down, didn't really shake our hands. He just started typing on a computer. What kind of school do you want to start? And we explained by then, we kind of knew that it was going to be a girls' high school, and we weren't going to charge so that girls could go to school. And he liked that idea. He was British, and he had moved down to Kenya in the late 50s. And he married a Kikuyu woman and had kids, and really, he was Kenyan, right? So he liked the idea that we were going to be helping girls of material poverty. And then he stopped talking, and he just was working on his computer. I'm serious. For like 3 minutes, we're sitting there, and then the guy gets up, and he walks out of the office. And I looked at Jenni, and I was like, what the heck? She kind of shook her head, and should we go? And we're about ready to get up and walk out. And he comes in and he drops this folder full of papers on his desk. And he goes, "There's a school out there waiting for you." And we went, "Wow." And he said, "Yeah, they made a movie about it. They made a movie called The Boys of Baraka. They made it for inner city lads from Baltimore, kids that were in trouble, and they would come to that school, but they left, and now it's empty. And my school was looking at buying it, but it's too far out in the bloody bush, so we're not going to get it. But here's a write-up. I flew a man down from England to do this." And we said thank you, and we left. And we looked through it, and it was incredible. The school was, on paper, magical. It was 60 acres. It had classrooms because they had teachers coming over from the U.S. There was guest accommodations. And it was out in the countryside, which is what Jenni and I wanted. We wanted to be out in the natural beauty. We wanted to be a place where girls could be removed and we could create a sanctuary for them. But there's no way. It was huge, and we were just starting out. I was a history teacher. She was in educational research. We had school debt. And the one thing he said was, "I don't have a phone number, but I've got the manager's email. You can try emailing him, but there's no electricity out there. You're probably not going to get him." He was super negative. And so we thought, well, what the heck? Let's try. So we emailed this guy, the manager. His name was Peter. And shockingly, we got a response like an hour later. And he said, this was like on a Friday night. He said, and we're leaving the country on Sunday night. He said, "If you can be here, I can show you around, but I have to leave at noon because I'm going down to Nairobi to pick up one of the last board members because he's coming to lay off the staff. They can't pay for the upkeep of this school anymore. But if you come up here, I'll show you around." So we hopped in our car the next morning early. We got up there. We met Peter. We walked onto this campus. And it was something else. Driving out there, it took us about 45 minutes on a road that drove through the Laikipia Plateau. And it was green. And we drove past zebra. And we drove past buffalo. And we drove past Maasai, traditionally dressed, grazing their cows and goats on the side of the road. And all those feelings that I had when I was a 12-year-old kid were back in me. And we get to this campus, and it is everything that a school should be. It's spread out. It's 60 acres. The campus is laid out sort of in levels as it kind of goes up a hill until there's a large rock outcropping. Far behind the school, you can see Mount Kenya, which is just standing high above the Laikipia Plateau. So as we were walking across the school grounds, we just couldn't believe the beauty. There was pink and lavender bougainvillea, and the classrooms were large. And, it wasn't like Makambako Secondary School where there was no glass in the windows. There was desks in every classroom, and there was books in the library. And we just thought, this is somebody's dream. I wish it was ours, but there's no way we can afford this. And Peter said to us, "Well, I'm going to Nairobi too. If you want to try talking to our last board member tomorrow, you can give it a shot, see what he says. But I'll be honest with you, they've been trying to sell it to people for 4 years and they can't agree on anyone." And I asked Peter, what do you think it cost for them to build this place? And he said, "Well, they don't tell us, but the rumor is somewhere around $2 million US. So my heart sank. But on the drive back to Nairobi, I just kind of said a prayer. And Jenni and I talked about how incredible it would be, but we'd probably be building a school in a different place. So in the morning, the next day, we woke up bright and early. And Michael Farley, he was one of the last 3 Baraka board members who had flown into the country. And he had flown in the middle of the night, and we went to his hotel. And in the lobby of that hotel, which was a small 12-foot by 8-foot room, with they had a TV going that had a Mexican soap opera playing, and it was turned down. And Michael was eating his breakfast, and we talked with him, and we told him our dreams. And the universe works in incredible ways because Michael had done his Peace Corps in Kenya and he had a love for Kenya. And the reason over the 4 years that they had not sold to other organizations was they didn't agree with their missions. They didn't sell on principle. But the problem was the upkeep of the school was costing too much for the foundation that was the one foundation that was overseeing it. And so that they were going to have to cut ties with the workers that were there. So in about half an hour of hearing what we wanted to do, he made a proposal to us. And he said, if you'll take over the upkeep of this place, we'll work something out in the future. Until then, we'll rent it to you for $1 a year. You just take care of the upkeep. And we shook his hands. And less than 24 hours later, we were on a plane flying home. And Jenny and I looked at each other and we thought, what did we just do? We just took on paying $2,000 a month for the upkeep of this place. And I'm working a high school job and Jenny's working a job that's she's only been out for 2 years and we're going to have to fundraise our tails off to make this work. But the incredible thing is it did work because in 2008, we left our jobs and our life was good. I was head football coach. I was Solano County Teacher of the Year in 2008 when I put in my resignation papers. And 6 months before she left her job, I headed over to Africa. And out at that school, the Baraka school that would become the Daraja Academy, I spent a lot of hours shoveling bat poop out of the roofs and picking up dead mongooses out of the bathrooms. And we had to scrub everything down and we had to paint the walls and fill the cracks. And we put a lot of elbow grease into transforming a school that had sat in the equatorial African sun for 4 years into a place that students would be proud to learn and teachers would be proud to teach. Jenny joined me in December, and we had an amazing Christmas. We had an amazing first Christmas in Kenya, 2008. And in 2009, we went on student selection and found our first crop of girls. That first dream team, those girls that were going to not go on to the 9th grade, that we were giving a chance to. And the experiment that is Daraja Academy began. The experiment of a school where girls from a ton of different backgrounds, religions, tribal cultures could come together and become sisters and leave with the idea that changing the world is my goal. It's a miracle. And I know you're all going to love learning about it. And I know that you're all going to eventually fall in love with Daraja and the magic that surrounds it. Because Daraja means bridge, and you are Daraja. During one of our school breaks, Jenny and I went for a short vacation at Lake Baringo, and we camped on the side of the lake, and it was gorgeous. And on the drive home, we were driving through a stretch of grassland that's on the way to the school, probably about 45 minutes away. And there was a family of elephants grazing in the middle of the road. There was probably 20 of them, and they were slowly crossing from left to right in front of us. And it was sort of a downhill grade, and we went, wow, this is gorgeous. It's one of those things that I love about living in Kenya. So I do this little trick sometimes when we're around wildlife where I put the car in neutral and I turn it off so that the rumble of the engine doesn't disturb them. And then I slowly coast up close to the animals. Now this makes Jenny nervous because if one of those guys has a bad temper and decides to charge us, it's a little difficult to turn the car on. But it's incredible because you can get very close and they're not as nervous. They just sort of go about their business. And elephants are so neat, you know. They work like families, you know. Their matriarch showing the herd where they need to go and the little babies playing with each other. And so after we sat there for about 15 minutes watching this incredible family, Jenny goes, okay, let's go. It's time to go. So I go to turn on the key and the engine wouldn't turn over. And I did it again and it wouldn't turn over. And she looks at me and she goes, I told you so. That's always a bad idea. You're never doing that again. So I had to take a deep breath. I jumped out of the car. I messed with the cables on the battery and we got it going. And we did end up getting home. Now I tell that story because it wasn't always easy. You know, a lot of people look at Daraja Academy and they think, man, these nonprofit guys, they got it made. They just cruise through life and it's a joy. Well, it's hard. It's hard, and especially at the beginning. And by the way, that story, that wasn't a problem for me. That's why I went to Kenya. I love that kind of stuff, but it's a neat story to tell. But, you know, early on, money was tough. We had to really work our tails off to raise the money to get this thing going. And in our first year, I actually had to fly back to the US and cold call people just so we'd have enough money to finish the year. It was incredibly hard. But really our biggest problems that we faced were personal ones. You know, life still happens whether you're running an amazing girls' school or not. I think the hardest thing that we ever had to deal with was in December 2012. Jenni was pregnant. Christmas was coming. The school had closed and the girls had gone home. And we drove down the 4 hours to Nairobi to do some Christmas shopping and buy some food that you can't access up in Nanyuki, our little town that's close to the school. And we also had Jenni's OBGYN appointment for her 7-month. Sorry, guys. Jenni also had an appointment with her OBGYN. She was 7 months pregnant. And really, that was just sort of an afterthought as part of the Nairobi trip. So it was at that appointment that we sat down. And when the doctor looked at the results of her ultrasound, he said, "There's a problem with the baby." And we looked at him and he said, "No, there's really a problem with the baby. He's going to have to come early. He's not growing fast enough." There is no more terrifying news that a parent can hear than there's something wrong with the child that your wife is carrying. And we looked at each other and we were terrified. We basically were given some steroids that she was going to be injected with to help his lungs grow. And we were going to go to a hotel and just hunker down and pray. So that weekend, we did exactly that. I don't think we ever left the hotel room. And on Monday morning, we showed up at the hospital. And it was terrifying. In fact, I almost fainted right in the middle of the C-section. Jenni was so brave. And our little boy was born, Jack Jesse Doherty. He weighed 2.2 pounds. He was so tiny. And he came out, but he cried. And it was the most beautiful sound that I'd ever heard in my life. But he was going to need help. So he was taken to the neonatal ICU at Aga Khan Hospital, which is an incredible hospital in Nairobi. They have the best care. It rivals any hospital here in the U.S. And we basically moved to Nairobi. My mom flew in. She was almost 80 years old, and she flew in, and we were just a trio of people, and that little boy was the center of our world. Every day we would go and spend the day with him, and I would make trips during the night taking milk to the NICU unit that Jenni was pumping. But on his 28th day, he aspirated, and we lost our son. And there is no pain in the world like losing a little baby. You know, when he was in that hospital, I was making deals with God. God, if you will just let him be healthy, I will do this or I will do that. You're so scared. And when we lost him, it was a dark night, about 2 a.m., and the skies over the hospital were pouring rain. And it was like God was crying with us. And we had to carry my son's ashes home in my backpack to the United States. And I'll be honest, my wife and I, we crawled into a little cave. For 3 months, we were in a super deep depression. And I kind of understand why people become suicidal at those times. And if I think if Jenni wasn't around for me or I wasn't around for her, that would have become a real thought. But thankfully, we weren't. The thing is, the school was still there, except now there was 100 girls, and the first class was about to graduate, and there wasn't room to be in a cave. And so I kind of had to shake it off, and I had to come out, and I had to start working again. But I'll be honest with you, I don't think I ever really got back on track right. And I want to share this with you because I believe in being totally open. I asked the girls, like, if we're not going to carry around our past, if we're not going to shut the door on it either, we need to be honest about it. And you can always grow from other people's strength. I hit a pretty tough patch after we lost our son. A couple years later, my mom actually fell down the stairs and we lost her pretty quickly. A year after that, the next brother up from me, my brother Eric, he got a tumor on his brainstem. And over the course of a year, his body deteriorated, and I watched one of my heroes pass away. And I was crippled. I was so filled with grief and unable to cope with it that I began to drink too much. But I was able to hear my loved ones when they said that there was a problem. I was able to surrender. And I can tell you that my life is incredible after that. You know, I share this because I want anyone who's out there to know that no matter how big that issue that you're facing, whether it be depression or grief or addiction, there is a way out, and there's a way to get help, but you've got to trust people and you've got to be able to ask for it. You know, it's interesting, since I've been sober, bad things have happened, but I can face them. In fact, in the summer of 2019, this is crazy, I was over in Daraja, and I woke up one morning and I rolled out of bed and I put my foot on the ground, and it felt like there was glass inside of my knee. Now, I'd mentioned that I had been in a really bad car accident when I was 19. Well, I had ended up getting a knee replacement, and I stepped down, and I could tell there was something very wrong with my knee replacement. So I kind of limped around, and I went down to the office, and I was working with Victoria, our head of school, and Helen, our business manager, and they said, there's something wrong with you. You should go to the hospital. And no, I'm okay. And I ended up going to the hospital because it was really painful. And they said, we're going to admit you. You've got a bad infection, and it is in your knee. And there's metal in your knee. And that's a bad thing. And I said, well, what am I going to do? I said, well, we're going to give you IV antibiotics in the morning and at night. I said, give me an IV, and I'll just drive in here in the morning, and I'll drive in here in the night. I got work to do. Well, that was stupid, because in about 3 days, I had a fever of about a 103, something. And I ended up getting on a plane and flying back to SFO. And I went from SFO to the ICU. And I spent 3 weeks in the ICU on heavy-duty antibiotics, because there were all sorts of little bugs inside the metal in my knee, and they did not want to get out because the blood flow doesn't let the antibiotic get to them. So I left. I was on antibiotics for another couple months, and you know what? They just wouldn't go. So in December of 2019, I lost my leg about 5 inches above the knee, my right leg. So it's been about a year, and that's been a trip, to be honest with you people, because the week that I got my prosthetic leg and I was supposed to go into physical therapy to learn how to walk on it, I got a call from UCSF, and they said, hey, we're going to have to reschedule your appointment because you know that coronavirus thing that's been going on in China? Well, we just want to be safe, so we're going to shut down. So physical therapy never happened for me after my amputation. I had to learn how to walk during a global pandemic by taping a mirror up to my driveway. But what's incredible is, you know what? The same way that when I got into that crash at 19 and I had my sights on going to Africa, now I still have my sights on going to Africa, but it's going back to the girls of Daraja. That's where my fuel comes from today. And I know that people that learn about Daraja are going to have that same attachment, because the girls are so inspiring. They're so incredible. And it's just a magical place.
Daraja only exists because people around the world just like you believe that it should. It's about empathy, and it's about hope. Right now, you can totally change the trajectory of a girl's life by going to www.daraja-academy.org. Because 1 year of schooling changes a girl's life, and a high school diploma changes everything. This place is so much more than a school. It's a social movement fueled by love. It's time for you to cross that bridge. Because Daraja means bridge, and you are Daraja.